Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Roadmaster Exact Center steering stabilizer on a 2021 Jeep Gladiator. Now Jeeps do have a steering stabilizer from the factory here, and some systems will actually just replace this. Well, this one works in conjunction with it. And what that's gonna do is, as you're steering, the death wobble of Jeeps really comes down to it trying to find that center and bouncing back and forth. And having struts inside of the exact center is gonna allow that to kind of taper in and take that death wobble out. But also you're gonna get more steering feel because having a fixed point here on our track bar and then mounted to our tie bar means that those struts are gonna compress as you turn, and it's gonna bring it back to center when you let go of that steering wheel. This is what our exact center looks like when it's installed on our Gladiator, and this is attached to a bracket that's going to go to our track bar, and down the way on our driver's side we have our bracket that is going to attach to part of our tie rod. So as a Jeep owner, you probably know what the death wobble is, or at least heard of it, and it is quite terrifying, and feel free to check out some videos on that and see what it's about. But it is not a great situation to be in while driving your vehicle, and really it doesn't stop until you bring the vehicle to a stop. Well, this, having those struts to kind of center it back in, should eliminate that death wobble, and also you're going to get some of the vagueness that you get in the steering wheel just kind of eliminated. You get a little bit more feedback. You get a little bit more sure-footedness when driving your vehicle, and having that feedback in the steering wheel just makes for a better driving experience. Also, if your vehicle kind of wanders on the road, this will also help that by keeping it tracking nice and centered up. Now, another added benefit for you Jeep owners, if you're flat towing your Jeep, you've probably learned that you can't back up. And the reason being is it's going to jackknife the vehicle. And when you're driving something like this, if you get in a tight situation, having to go and unhook the Jeep kind of just makes for a long, tedious thing just to get a little bit more turning radius. If you can just back up a little, it makes a world of difference. And the exact center is going to keep those wheels nice and straight, allowing you to actually back up. Now, while doing this, you're going to want to go very slow and take your time. Also have a spotter while doing it, and just be careful, because if you go a little bit too extreme, it is still going to turn the wheels, but this is going to at least keep it in track, and that way you can still back up. Now here we are in a real world application. Dick needs to fill up with propane before hitting the road, and normally he can't back into this spot, and there's a gate here, so if he pulls in, he's going to have to back out, or if he backs in, he's going to have to go forward. And either way, that would have been a situation where he's not going to be able to do it with his towed vehicle. Well, let's see how it works. This is a decent amount of distance of backing up, and definitely something that wasn't possible before the exact center was installed on the Jeep. Another added benefit is going to be the fact that it's going to bring the steering wheel back to center, reducing the amount of counter steer that you need to do after a sharp turn. So we're just going to go in a small radius here, and I have it full lock. Now as I let go, the Jeep's still kind of following that same semicircle, and now it's finally starting to kind of center itself back up, but it does take a little bit. So instead of having to fight that wheel back to get it centered, this is going to kind of bring it back to that center for you, making just driving a little bit more responsive. You're not going to have as much vagueness in the steering, which Jeeps necessarily don't have the best steering input, and a lot of that has to do with the suspension and tires, but this should allow this to kind of bring that steering wheel back a little bit quicker. Now, in order to get our first bracket mounted up, we're going to be going to the hardware where our track bar is bolted in to the axle side. Now that bolt passes through, and we do have a keeper back here. Now we're going to take this out, and it's going to take a 21 millimeter socket. But before we do that, we don't want this to shift, and if it does start to, once we have that bolt out, kind of loosen up, to get that back in place is going to be a little bit tricky. So I've gone ahead and put a ratchet strap. I just kind of wrapped it around our axle here and then to the upper control arm, and that way if it starts to shift, I can kind of ratchet that back and bring it back to where it needs to be. So we'll go ahead and get this taken out. Now just make sure you hold on to your keeper nut as well as the bolt, as we're going to be using this for reinstallation. And there's not a whole lot of movement there, so that's good. And what we'll do is take our bracket. We're going to be passing this through here. And then before we get this put back on our keeper nut, we have Loctite included in the kit, so we're going to go ahead and get that placed on the threads. Get this passed back in. And we're not going to completely tighten it down here. We want to have a little bit of room to be able to adjust once we get our stabilizer actually in place with our other bracket. So just kind of make sure it's hand tightened in, and then we'll come back and tighten this later. I have this just snug enough to where it's going to stay in place if I don't touch it, but also I can still slightly adjust it to kind of get this dialed in to be able to get our exact center in place. So what I'll do now is take our exact center, slide this in, and we're going to put our bolt going up. Now this can get a little tight here because of the flat washer, so you can kind of feed it up over here. And then we'll just get this passed through, and having that ability to kind of move the bracket around is going to make it a lot easier for us to get this lined up. I'm going to finish that up with a flat washer and then our nylon lock nut here. Now we're going to need to grab our other bracket, and this is going to slip over our tie rod, and this bracket will face vertical. So once we kind of have this mocked up, it should be a pretty straight line here. Now to get our hex head bolts in, it's going to be a 1/4 inch drive, just a hex drive, and we're going to get this again just loosely installed, but kind of put it where it naturally falls here. Our other bracket we kind of have, you know, sitting roughly where it's going to be, but I'm going to put this in place and just again get these hand tightened on. And do that for both collars. Take our exact center here and the bolt from our bracket with the flat washer, and this is going to pass straight down. So part of the reason kind of left this loose to be able to kind of move is again to give us that clearance to be able to pass our hardware in. And then we're going to finish that up with a flat washer as well as a nylon lock nut. Now I'm going to start to snug things down, but we need to make sure we put a little bit of Loctite here on these threads as well. Before we get this snug down, we want to make sure that we have these tightened down to our brackets. So we have a 3/4 inch wrench here that I'm going to hold on to that nylon lock nut, and then I have a 3/4 inch socket that I'm going to get up here and start snugging down. We can also do that for our bolt that's on our bracket. So both the bolts that are attaching our exact center, go ahead and get those tightened. Now we'll get ready to tighten this back down, but we're going to want to make sure our bracket is as level as possible with our bracket that's here as we're going to be drilling this hole. So if you need to, you can kind of use the exact center to kind of pull it up, just to kind of get this all square, and then we'll just tighten down that 21mm nut. Now we're going to be drilling this hole out, and it's going to be about a 3/8 drill bit to get that, and that way we can run this bolt through to keep this nice and in place. But if we need to, we can draw this up a little bit by tightening it down just to give us the most amount of clearance possible. With a 3/4 inch ratchet and socket, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of snug this down. I'm not going to get it completely tight, but at least that's going to allow this to give us the most amount of clearance for drilling. So with our hole drilled through, make sure that the bolt is able to pass through. Now we're going to be using a flat washer here, and just because of the clearance with the other bolt, just kind of, if you need to, you can put that closer to the bracket and then push the head of the bolt in. Now do be careful, there may be some metal shards kind of where we just drilled out. We're going to follow this up with the smaller flat washer and our nylon lock nut. And you'll see there's kind of just a pocket up here. And same thing, you may have to kind of back this out just a hair to get that flat washer in. Now to get this tightened down, I'm using two 9/16 wrenches. It's pretty tight here. I'm not really able to get a socket on either of them, but slowly but surely we'll get this all tightened up. And to make this a lot easier, I think if I was to do it all over again, I would wait to install the exact center. So fully install the bracket, just make sure it's nice and square. But once you have that all drilled in, you will be able to get a socket that's not just a thin wall on here, and tightening it down is going to be a lot easier. And then you can actually go ahead and get your exact center bolted up. Now at this point, we're going to come back and tighten up our brackets here, but we want to make sure that this is as square as possible. So you want it almost to be a straight line here. It does almost kind of rub against our drag link here. This is nice and straight. That way it's getting that full force of the struts both ways, and it's not going to go in at an angle. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to get these tightened down using my 1/4 inch hex bit, and then we're actually going to come back and torque them down with a torque wrench. So don't get too crazy here. I'm just using a small 3/8 impact, so you don't want to round these out. Kind of tighten evenly on each side. Now when getting all this torque down, I'm going to go ahead and do these first. You're going to get the torque settings found in your instruction manual, but doing these ones first will kind of keep this in place and keep it from rotating around, and then we can be able to get our other ones, which are a higher torque yield. So I'll go through, and I'm just doing a kind of a cross pattern here. Going to be adjustable lock nuts on the exact center, and I'm just going to go ahead and get those tightened down, and then we're going to go out for a test drive and make sure that it's tracking straight. And if it pulls to one way or the other, we can always adjust that to get it finely tuned. So the first thing we're going to do before kind of going back to that radius and seeing the difference is making sure obviously it tracks straight. So find a nice flat straight shot of pavement that you can kind of just take your hands off the wheel and let it do its thing, and it should go straight, and if not, we'll be able to adjust that out. And ours looks pretty good. This isn't the flattest spot of asphalt here, so we're going to get up to a different spot and we're going to see how it does. Pulling slightly to the left, not bad, just enough to where it really wants to kind of keep going that way. Pretty decent though. So now this will be the first real turnaround where I'm going to see what this does as far as kind of bringing our steering wheel back to center, or the exact center. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's definitely noticeable. Now, I've done exact centers on RVs, and those are very, very quick to kind of bring them back to center. This is definitely, it's not as aggressive as those by any means, but the steering feel is significant. You know, as you probably know, driving a Wrangler, it's kind of vague. It's not the most, you can't really feel a whole lot of input of the steering wheel, and over the bumps, our steering wheel staying nice and straight here. I'm not having to do a whole lot. It's tracking great. And but yeah, definitely the feel, the feedback that I'm getting from the steering wheel, it gives it a slightly heavier steering. And some of the best cars that have great handling out there are ones that have a heavier steering feel. So it's by no means, you know, you're not having to fight it, but it does feel pretty good. The feedback is there, and it feels like I can really handle a little bit better. Now we're back at the same spot. I'm going to go ahead and do a full lock turn here and see what it does. Wow. Yeah, no, it's definitely already kind of stabilizing it out to where it's not just trailing in that slightly larger radius. It does kind of start to pull me straight, so definitely noticeable. Now after your test drive, if it's pulling straight, then all you got to do is continue driving your vehicle and enjoy it. But if yours is pulling slightly to the left or the right, you are going to have to do a little bit of adjustment. You may have to do it multiple times until you have it perfectly centered up. And it's pretty easy to do. The jam nuts, you can see they have on both ends. You're going to want to loosen those on both ends, and that's going to allow us to get our adjustments. So I'm going to just kind of put these in the center here. And what I'm going to do is give this a 1/6 of a turn upward. And we'll call that pretty good. Now make sure you can see the boot kind of twists up a little bit. Just kind of, you can peel this back a little bit, center that back up, and then slide it back. And then we'll go ahead and get our jam nuts tightened back down. And then we'll take it back out on the road course until we get it perfectly centered up exactly where we want it. And that was a look and install of the Roadmaster Exact Center Steering Stabilizer on a 2021 Jeep Gladiator.